Welcome to Sacrifice and Success, a podcast that looks at what we give up in order to thrive. I'm John Hegarty, chairman of Soho-based independent media agency Electric Glue. In this series, I'm talking to people about what they have sacrificed to be where they are today. With me today is Lorenzo Bruno Nero Dallaglio, OBE, better known as Lawrence Dallaglio, a retired rugby union player and former captain of England. Founder of Dallaglio Rugby Works, a charity that uses the values of rugby to help re-engage disadvantaged youth with life. Tell me a bit about, because I understand you're part Italian and British and English, Irish.
Yes. I mean, first of all, it's a beautiful name, really. I mean, my father was first generation Italian. My mother was Irish, so I don't know. I'm never quite sure, really. I'm half Italian, half Irish, which I guess makes me quite a dangerous Englishman, I think, is probably the best way. But no,
so I'm interviewing a dangerous Englishman here. And for those who don't know, Lawrence Dallaglio, who is about 6'4" and 6'4" wide, I tell you, when he says dangerous, I know what he means.
No, I was born on St. Lawrence's Day, 10th of August, and I didn't really appreciate them. I was named after St. Lawrence until I was, many years later, I was up at Ampleforth College and I was in an interview with my mother and father, which is a wonderful school in Yorkshire, Benedictine monastery. Quite why I was sent up there was beyond me, really. It was a long way from home. But anyway, I was going for the interview and the headmaster, he said to me, "Your name?" He said, "Lawrence." He said, "It's a very special name in this part of the world." And I'm 13 years of age, and my mum's kicking me under the table. I had no idea. I thought,
Not in agreement.
I just sort of guessed. So I said, his words just came out my mouth, and it just said, "Yeah, it's patron saint of the school." And he said, "Yes." He said, "It is." He was amazed that I could understand this knowledge. And then he said, "When was your birthday?" And I said, 10th of August. And again, his face lit up. And he said, "That's a very special day." And I sort of just put two and two together and said, "St. Lawrence's Day." And then the penny dropped that actually my mum had called me Lawrence because I was born on St. Lawrence's Day.
On St. Lawrence's Day.
But Bruno, which means brown in English, was my uncle. Nero, of course, was the emperor, but also my grandfather. And Dallaglio, which is literally translated from the Gaelic. But it's. I mean, I look very Anglo-Saxon. I don't think I look Italian.
I would agree with that.
And I think you become quite proud of your name eventually because when you're younger you think, well, it's a bit strange. It's not John Smith. It's not John Smith or Dave Brown.
Yeah, I know.
Is it?
Were you ridiculed for your name at all?
Well,
were you laughed at?
A little bit, but then again, that's...
Mind you, when you're 6'4".
Well, yeah, eventually I sort of, when I grew about 6 or 7 inches over one summer, you suddenly get a lot of friends, don't you, really? But no, I was very proud, and I'm very proud of my Italian heritage, my past, my family. I mean, I think you get to, really appreciate that and really feel very proud of that, and to have that, kind of as part of your upbringing, I think makes you slightly, it gives you an amazingly different perspective.
I think that's fantastic, and I there is a dangerous element around today, isn't there, of kind of nationalism and the way people approach it, and suddenly, waving the cross of St. George and all of that, and I'm English, and what does that mean? We're all actually sort of hybrids in some shape or form. There's no such thing as pure, which is the biggest nonsense anybody ever said. But celebrating your heritage, I think, is crucially important, and not losing it and not leaving it behind.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's important to not to be too... I mean, to reflect and look back, to understand, the wonderful program they have on TV. Who do you think you are, or where do you come from? I mean, everyone should really be part of that. Everyone should understand where they've come from, and maybe that drives some of our behaviours, the way we are, the way we behave in lots of different ways. You tend to, things are passed down the generations, and some of it you choose to keep and keep in your kind of library, and others you might sort of get rid of and try and replace with other skills and other things.
It's lovely that, because I think it encourages you to build bridges, not walls. Yeah. So often you see and meet people who want to build walls as opposed to bridges and reach out, and I think that background really, really helps you understand that it is about bridges. It's about...
Absolutely. And I mean, I think I realised very early on that family was a really big part of of my life. Having an Italian family, and then a sort of English-Irish East End, but Irish origins. Again, my mother was one of 10, my father was one of 5. I've got 44 cousins. It's quite extraordinary, really. So, that whole sense of family is really important. You can imagine, my mother was brought up in Stepney, in Bethnal Green, in the East End of London. So, during the war, so family was a really critical part of that period. And my father equally in Italy. Family is everything to the Italians, really. So it was always very central to the way we were brought up as well.
There's a wonderful song by Ry Cooder, and it's called Across the Borderline. And actually, I always say to people, Willie Nelson does the best version of it, in my view. And it is about people who've sacrificed to leave somewhere, to go somewhere else for a better life or whatever reason. And I think we often forget that. And, you turn on the television and you see people crossing the Mediterranean now seeking a better life and the sacrifices they've had to make to do that. And lots of us in our families have sort of a story that could be not as desperate as that, but about people having to leave somewhere to go somewhere else. And I think that sacrifice becomes very profound, and to respect it is important.
Yeah, I think as we, when we have children and the next generation, we always try and create a better environment. So, to make their lives a bit better than the lives that you experience. And I think I was very, when you talk about sacrifice, my father was born in 34, came to London in 1955, probably to learn his fourth language at the time. The Europeans were incredible. He already spoke Italian, French, Spanish, and he wanted to come to London to learn English. And he came here at the age of 22. Started as a waiter in the Cumberland Hotel, and then he's still living here now at aged 86. So he left Italy to learn English and have and explore, and then never came back. So. And what I really recognised growing up was my parents were incredibly working class. Really, they owned my father started as a waiter, but they owned a sweet shop on Commercial Road in the East End of London, and I was there at the age of 6, sort of behind the counter, and so many vivid memories of the same people that came into the shop in the morning were the same people that came in the evening. There was a real sense of community in the East End. It's a very different place now, as we all know. But there was a little tray of single cigarettes that was sold on the counter, and there was rituals and routines, but very working class. And then just the enormous sacrifices that my parents were making even then, because they had my sister and I. Francesca was 3 years older than me, but they wanted to provide in a way that maybe they weren't provided for in the same way. And I always say to people, I was given 2 of the greatest things you can give a young person, a child in their life. The first is unconditional love, even to the point where, many years later, when the police knocked on the door and said, Mrs. Dallaglio, is your son Lawrence there? She said, I think there's definitely a case of mistaken identity, or you must have the wrong house. But unconditional love, not just, very outward displays of emotion, as you would expect from their backgrounds, particularly in Italy. Hugs, kisses, that's only just come into fashion about 20 years ago in England. But also the other thing was just a belief system that you could go out there and conquer the world, that anything was possible. Now, I don't know whether that belief system was born out of a resilience that happened to that generation, but just pumping you full of self-belief and confidence, really. And my mother, every interaction she had with me and with everyone was always a positive interaction.
That's a brilliant thing to be given, isn't it?
It's the greatest gift in the world, because there's lots of things we can guarantee in life. One is that we arrive with nothing, and we leave with nothing. And what happens in between is really important. And I think we, rightly or wrongly, spend our whole life chasing health, wealth, happiness, status, all these things. And actually, the greatest gift in the world is giving, and the greatest gift is also sharing as well, because we're all on this planet together, really, and we're in it together. and to give. And when I say give, I don't mean a gift. I mean, give your energy, give your spirit, give your, and my mother from a very early age, not just with me, but with other children, with anyone she came into contact with, would just, there was a pep talk, there was a team talk, there was a pump you full of self-belief. Whatever mood you were in, you'd leave in a better place when you and I think that is a special kind of person that has got that ability to lift your spirits. And it's something that I've tried to keep with me, really, because it doesn't cost anything to be nice and be positive and be kind to people and try and make them feel better. So yes, unconditional love and a belief system that you could achieve. Conquer the world. Shoot for the moon, and you'll be amongst the stars. Nothing is unattainable. My mother decided to move from Bethnal Green to Barnes in southwest London. I said to her, from a family of 10 in the East End, I said, that must have been an epiphany moment. I said, what were you thinking? I'm very glad you did, by the way. And she just said that I knew I had to get out of the East End of London. We had to make some sacrifices. We had to do some things to try and get us all to to give us a better future and a better place. And that's what she did.
I must ask, you must ask your dad, has he read the book, The Spaghetti Tree? And it's about Marion Franco's Terrazza restaurant on the corner of Romilly and Dean Street, out of which came all the great Italian restaurants, and Jamie Oliver finally was influenced by it. And it was a place where the Italians really began to show the English how to cook.
As you could imagine, my life has been, food has been an enormous part of my life, our lives, forever, really. I mean, we had olive oil and balsamic vinegar sort of 40 years ago in our house, really. And
you could only get it from the chemist.
Yeah, absolutely. And my father was, he started life as a waiter in the Cumberland Hotel. He ended up managing the London Metropole, the Savoy, worked in restaurants all throughout his career, and then went on to be a lecturer in food and beverage service and management. Piero and Vasco Pavilion Restaurant in Soho here, they were his two great friends. He worked with both of them. He designed the menu for that restaurant years ago.
It's a great restaurant, actually. Yeah. I love it.
He worked in the first Spanish restaurant called the Martinez in London, and it was owned by an Italian. And he's
a Spanish restaurant owned by an Italian. I love it.
And he said to my dad, look, you need to go in there and you need to find, keep an eye on the staff and tell me what's going on there, because they were all Spanish, the staff. And my dad said, well, I'm Italian, I don't speak Spanish. He said, well, you'll get to know it quite quickly. And he learned Spanish in about 3 months.
Brilliant.
There was huge sacrifice, and I think I was very aware of the fact that both of my parents were working their fingers to the bone in all these different professions. My mother had 4 or 5 different jobs. She worked, that generation worked. She was a chauffeur for Lord Bowater. She was an air stewardess for British Caledonian. She worked all her life, but she would do 3 or 4 jobs at a time to put food on the table, to provide. And she wanted my sister Francesca and I to have the very best of everything in life. And she paid these incredible school fees. I just don't know how they did it. I really don't.
Because actually, for coming from a working class background, Ampleforth would have been an incredibly expensive.
Well, it was, and to be honest, it was out of the question unless my sister was a dancer. She got a scholarship to the Royal Ballet School to Elmhurst, and then I think my parents were able to afford to send me to Ampleforth. Or my father must have done a sort of deal in Barolo or Brunello wine. I think he was importing Italian wine into the UK back in the day, and
something for Sunday.
Yeah, well,
high mass.
The monks do like a little bit of wine.
So tell me, so there you are in this very powerful working class background, and then sport comes into your life. So what was the journey into sport?
Yeah, well, I didn't have we didn't have a family of sports people in the family. It wasn't in the history or the heritage. My father's family were violin makers. That sounds sort of something out of the movies, doesn't it? Italian father, violin makers. But no, genuinely, they made and restored violins in Emilia-Romagna, and so. I really liked music when I was younger. I did a lot of singing at school. I was lucky enough to be in the choir. I wasn't a great singer, but I think I was quite a good team player. I was a good person to have in the choir. Probably, quite good on the social side and good fun, but I wasn't never going to be given a solo part. But we sang in Evita here in the West End stage.
Wow.
We in the Prince Edward Theatre with Stephanie Lawrence and Elaine Page, and I sang it, for Andrew Lloyd Webber at various things. We recorded at Abbey Road. We did a number one hit with Tina Turner. So music was a huge part of my life, and music's, playing to an audience, right? I mean, it's, and then suddenly my music teacher taught me the piano for free, really, because he knew that my parents couldn't afford it. So he came to my house and he'd be happy with the quality of the wine that my dad would give him, and my father would cook him a meal, which was incredible. So he would teach me the piano. And he said to me, he said, I love coming here and I'm very happy to teach your son the piano, but he said there's a crossroads that's going to happen in his life, and between sport and music, and I can see that he's already...
A decision has to be made.
A decision has to be made, and he's veering towards sport. And I was actually, like a lot of people in this country, fascinated by football for some reason. Everyone wants to be a professional footballer when they grow up. And then if you realise that you're not very good, and then you take up rugby, and if you're no good at that, they put you in a boat, I suppose, and if you can't catch, that's what happens, really.
And tell me, was there a moment when you picked up a rugby ball and went, I get this?
Not really. I mean, I got sent to Ampleforth because I was getting into a lot of trouble in London, and my mum sent me as far away as possible. And we were Catholic, and therefore Ampleforth was the eminent Catholic school in the whole of the country. And so I went up there, and when I arrived, I realised that it was it was obviously a religion. It's a Benedictine monastery from 1802, but actually the religion there was rugby. They only played rugby. I mean, there was 27 rugby pitches and I thought, where's the football? And then I very quickly sort of started to play rugby, and it was freezing. I'd never been to a place so cold in my life. And I started on the wing, and then I sort of fell in love with rugby. But not, just by accident, really. But I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the kind of the vibe of being involved, as part of a team, etc. But I played, just every sport really as much as I could. My mum used to say to me, "You are what you're exposed to in life, good and bad," and she's very true. And I tried to expose, and she tried to expose me to as many things as possible, because that's what you do with young people. You don't quite know what they want to do. They don't know what they want to do. Everyone's good at something. Some of us are lucky enough to find out what that is. And she opened as many doors as possible. Learn the saxophone, learn the piano, learn this. Play rugby, play cricket, and they sacrificed so much to do that at great cost to themselves. But I think that was just the generation that they put other people before themselves. It was a very selfless generation.
But I'm sure they got huge joy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Out of seeing.
But I think when you're young, you don't realise necessarily, you don't appreciate that what's going on. And it's only till you start to get a bit older and you realise, actually, maybe when you have children of your own and you realise that how much it takes on you, that the sacrifices that were made. So sport became a big part of my life, always was, from the age of about 12 or 13 all the way through. And then rugby became a bit more kind of serious from the age of about 16 or 17. But then I had a very transformational moment in my life, where I lost my sister very tragically on the Marchioness riverboat disaster. I was sat round the dinner table with my mum and my sister and her boyfriend, and I was invited, and I would normally be quite up for a party, but I decided to stay at home. And then the next day she didn't come back. So, that was obviously a devastating loss overnight, and quite understandably, it blew our world apart, really. We were a very tight-knit family, very close, and for a couple of years I found life really difficult, as you'd imagine. You kind of question the reason for being. I was making a lot of poor decisions. I was, my life was definitely going in a very
spiraling down.
Yeah, definitely, and just making some bad decisions, and just living for the day, and kind of wondering what it was all about, really. And then, after a while, I thought to myself, I need to do, and I need to do something. Not only to help myself, because this is just getting worse and worse, but actually I need to do something to help my mum and my dad, because they're growing further and further apart. Burying one of your own children just doesn't even come into your mind when you have children. So I decided to join a rugby club. And it was very kind of out the blue. I'd obviously enjoyed rugby. I'd shown a bit of aptitude about it, and I thought, I've got to do something. So I picked up the newspaper, and I looked at the sport pages and I looked at the rugby, and there was this team called Wasps that were at the top of the table. I thought, right, I'll go there. And I found out it was in London, so that was a good start. And I got on the tube and I went to Wasps, and I was in a really dark place. I needed a family. I needed someone to put their arms around me. I needed someone to not talk about what happened in the past. I just needed that. And I walked into what could only be described as what looked like a working man's club, really, in North London, in a place called Sudbury. I'd come from a very posh private school that had 27 rugby pitches. I arrived at a rugby club that had 2, which was top of the table in England. I thought to myself, this is not quite what I expected. But I walked
quite the glamour I was looking for.
But I walked in, and from the moment I walked in, I was accepted for what I was. I was appreciated. No one asked about anything. They could see that I was a sort of slightly pained young man. But rugby became a kind of a real motivation for me. Not just.
And that was what age for you?
That was 18.
18.
And that was not just for me. That was 2 years after that was 1990. So it was a year after the disaster.
Yeah.
And it became a sort of therapy for me, and it also became a real sort of community and family for my parents, to sort of bring a smile back to their face, and slowly but surely, that's what we started to do. And that's probably why I stayed there for 20 years. I never left. I joined Wasps and never left, because it was such an important part of my life. And my sister was one of these. She was an incredibly talented dancer. She got into the Royal Ballet School at the age of 8 after 5 lessons. She did every single exam. She got honours in every exam across all aspects of dance, Shiketti, modern dance, classical dancing, and then got to she passed her ARAD teaching exam and had just about to get a job to go and work in the Austrian National Ballet, and then died on an accident. So she sacrificed everything, for her career, to just all that hard work, and then it's gone in an instant. And I mean, listen, I was, she was the perfect child. She worked incredibly hard. She got honours in every exam. And I thought rugby players were hard-working, sports people were hard-working, dancers. It's a completely different level. And I was always in and out of trouble all the way through school. I wasn't particularly academic, and she would always have my back. She'd always say to my mum and dad, well, particularly my mother, she said, "Don't worry, Lawrence, he'll come good in the end." And obviously, I was traumatized beyond belief at losing my sister, because we hadn't spent a huge amount of time together, because she'd sacrificed all of her family time to be dancing. But the time we did spend together, we got on very, very well. So every time I took the rugby field, every time I spoke to any players about what our purpose in life was, it was always, the playback was always about honouring the memory of Francesca, and any problem that I encountered after that, in not just in my professional life but in my private life or anything, was just a minor bump in the road, really, because you realise that life is a real journey, and sometimes there's an upward trajectory, and sometimes there's a few bumps in the road. We all have a cross to bear in life. Mine and my parents came at a very early age, where you have this seismic incident that happens, and so I used it to motivate myself in a way that became very powerful, not just for me but for the people around me, because I was driven to play rugby. And when I started to play, I felt I was driven by a much higher purpose, because technically I was okay, and tactically you learn to get better and become a student of the game, but it's all about emotion, really. It's about finding the right connection between your head and your heart. And when you're with a lot of other people in a changing room, what's going on in their head and their heart is really fundamentally quite important to how they're going to play. So I was always very, very driven by emotion. I was always searching when I played for finding that connecting tissue that links everyone together. And to be honest, when you're in a changing room, I'm not going to start talking about rugby. 10 minutes before the game, I'm not going to tell some of the best players how to go and do their thing. It's about touching their heart and getting inside that and being able to connect it all together. So play it back to something that takes their performance and them to an emotional level that is superior to anything that's going on in the changing room next door.
That's a lovely observation, that, because it's like so many things in life. It isn't about the thing, it's about the higher purpose of that thing. does it have a higher purpose? And getting people to connect with that higher purpose really then motivates and becomes profound. Well, I think that's an amazing story. We have Francesca to thank for so much. You're listening to Sacrifice and Success, a podcast brought to you by independent media agency Electric Glue. So there you are. You're progressing. You've stayed at the Wasps, isn't it? The rugby league. You didn't join London Irish. No. They really missed out.
Well, I thought I'd start at the top and work my way down, really, because that's the way you do things, right?
I think there's another observation there. It's about loyalty, isn't it? And there's a lovely because I went to art school, and there's a lovely thing. A teacher said we were all drawing, sitting around drawing, and he stopped the class and he said, "Look, I want to just say that when a drawing is going wrong, what you don't do is turn the page over and you start again. You keep working on that drawing until it's right, and then you turn the page over." And then there was this amazing pause, and he said, "I suppose I'm talking about life as well, really."
Yeah, absolutely.
Isn't that brilliant? And I think you read so much today, and this is about we sacrifice to succeed, and that working on something to get it right, to make it right, to work and work and work on it, and knowing that you can do so. A profound message there for people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't want to sound too dramatic, but sport is it's incredibly powerful. Ultimately rugby is 15 human beings, 25, 26, whatever it might be, against another 25, 6 human beings. So, but it's about the sacrifices that you have to make to each other, and I guess if we were going to war, and God forbid we would ever have to go to war, but some people have had to do that. That's the ultimate sacrifice, isn't it? Really, you don't want to go to war. Unless there's something distinctly disturbing about you, So, but if you don't do your job, the person next to you loses their life. And if I don't do my job, that's the difference between getting back on the helicopter or not getting back on the helicopter. Now that's very dramatic, but that's what happens on the rugby field. No one loses their life, but if you are not prepared to make the sacrifices for each other, then the outcomes that you get are not very good. And
I'm thinking of the Bill Shankly quote about football, aren't I? The one about life and death. It's much more important than that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can't get the quote quite right.
You're right. But I think it's having that level of honesty with each other about sacrifice. And the other thing about sport is that I've felt on reflecting on it for the last however many years. I had I was lucky enough to have an incredibly successful career where, won lots of trophies for club, for country, in all sorts of different ways. Lots of highs, majority of highs, few lows, as you're inevitably going to get injury, loss of form, all sorts of different things. But it's the sacrifices that not just you have to make to do that job, but actually more importantly the sacrifices that everyone else has to make to allow you to do your job. And my wife, who I've been with for 25 years, it's a very selfish career being a sportsman.
Yes.
And the reason it's selfish, even though you don't mean it to be, is because it's all about you. And you're in a results-driven business, and it's about getting the results. And this is a results-driven business that analyses you every week, every day, every week, every month, every match. And it's very public as well. But it's a very selfish career because ultimately, yes, of course, there's the benefits of you being successful and you being, a good sportsman is that maybe people feel proud, but everyone has to sacrifice their own life to allow you to do what you want to do. And I used to articulate that to the group that I was playing with and just say, look, this is what it's all about. I remember bringing everyone's family and friends into the changing room and saying, these are the people that allow you to be the person you are. And when you go out on that field, if you don't give your best, you're not letting yourself down.
This is who you're playing
This
for.
is who you're letting down, because they share every emotion with you. There's only ever two emotions in sport. We don't do that drawing thing like football. There's either agony or ecstasy. You either win or you lose, and I think we all know which emotion we prefer better.
And you also sacrifice your life to it, don't you?
Well,
because,
and also it's not a glamorous career. People only see the glamorous side of a particular sport, but getting your face smashed in all over the world is very underrated. I can assure you, it's a really tough career, and they're not rewarded anywhere near to the level that they should be for what they do. But then again, motivation and sacrifice, all those sacrifices that we made and the generation that I made was not. I never thought about rugby I never measured it by the financial gain in any way. I mean, if you did, you wouldn't play rugby. You'd go and do something much more creative and much more smart, where you could earn a bit more money. So it was never about the money for me. It was about, as I said, the purpose. And if you can make profit with purpose, then you're a good man.
That's a great lesson. Profit with purpose, isn't that? Yeah, I like that. So now, tell me, with your background, you could have played for Ireland, you could have played for Italy, but you played for England. So that there was a choice you had to make.
Yeah, there was. I feel very English. I mean, but I'm also, as I said earlier, I'm very proud of my heritage, my history, my Italian, my Irish roots. But I was born in England, and I'm as I said, I'm dangerously English because I'm not conservative. I'm not, outward displays of emotion are really important to me. I have immense pride in being English, but that doesn't mean I don't respect other countries for their pride in being Scottish or Welsh or Irish. I used to become incensed by the fact that when our Celtic cousins show that their pride, it's patriotism, and when English people show their pride, it's somehow perceived as arrogant and jingoist and something else. It's not that. We are as patriotic as any other country, and I think we somehow have an issue celebrating that. Maybe it's because we've done an awful lot of damage around the world, England, haven't we?
Well,
really?
we are
and maybe we're paying for our former sins.
We are the dominant nation within the British Isles, so maybe there's an element of that about it.
But I was drawn to England. I felt very passionate about it. I was given the opportunity to play for Italy, but I just didn't feel that it was ever that they weren't necessarily a particularly strong rugby nation. Ireland came knocking at the door in a typically Irish way. The chairman of Ireland selected. He said, "Hello, Lawrence." He said, "We've heard you like a few points of the black stuff." He said, "How would you like to wear the green shirt of Ireland?" I mean, you can't knock their charm and he said, "We'd hate to see you wearing the white shirt of England when you could be wearing the green shirt of Ireland." And
I love it. And offered you a Guinness.
And offered me a Guinness. And 3 years later, I was sat on top table in the Berkeley Court Hotel in Dublin, having just captained England against Ireland, where we thumped them by 40 points. And the chairman, Noel Murphy, said, "Lal," he said, "we nearly had you, boy." He said, "We nearly had you."
That positivity, I love that.
But I made, in hindsight, I made the right choice because I had a privileged England career. I played for England for 13 years. We had an amazing run with some of the game's greatest players, and it was an incredible journey of discovery. We knew each other inside out, and it obviously culminated in that wonderful night in Sydney where we managed to get over the line against Australia. But
a great moment.
Great moment.
Moment.
There was so many different. There was a lovely symmetry to my rugby career because I made my international debut at Twickenham in 1995. I came off the bench as a replacement against South Africa. We lost. And Francois Pienaar was playing for South Africa. And then 13 years later, so much water under the bridge, we pretty much achieved everything. And then I played my last game against South Africa as a replacement coming off the bench in the World Cup final in 2007, and we lost. So I sort of entered, I exited my career by the same door as I entered it.
But you're able to smile about that.
Absolutely.
Which is absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
I want to just go back over something you said, and it's not to do with rugby, it's to do with belonging. Again, that's something that people, get very, that's where nationalism, I think, is a problem. That I always think people who, even though their parents weren't from these isles, but they came here from Africa, from Caribbean, from wherever it is, but they were born here. I think they have every right to be as English as somebody who's been here for generations, because they are English. It's a very important message to send out to people. Like, that's why I think the nationalism,
Yeah,
I think we get a bit concerned.
I agree, and also I think we must reflect for a second on each of our own existence. I mean, no person's born bad. They're just born into any situation, and the situation that you found yourself in growing up is very different to mine, is very different to everyone else, and you can't hurt people for, or have a go at people for wanting to be better, wanting to to have a better life, and I think it's not until you really meet people who have had real sacrifice in their life that you realise actually that there's so many different layers of what we would deem as sacrifice. We often feel kind of low sometimes in our life for various reasons, and I always say, my parents, and I agree. I will say to anyone that there's always someone worse off than you in life. You know what I mean? So you mustn't feel down, too down about it. Just go and reflect on that, and go and see and talk to some of those people, because you recognise actually there's so much more more sacrifice that can be made.
But I also, I love that observation. It's all those influences, from Italian background, East End, Irish, that came into your life that made you who you are. And, as a nation, we benefit from those influences coming in. We always have done. This is the silly thing.
Which is why I think I feel so kind of disengaged and sort of almost shameful about the whole sort of last 2 years around Europe and the UK. I mean, it's awful, really. I mean, why?
Shameful.
It's shameful. Why would I? I mean, my father came from Italy at the age of 22 and made his life in this country. So, why would I say that's a bad thing to? And
look how we've benefited.
Yeah, exactly. So,
so
I find it very strange, really, and I'm. Although I'm deeply English and people remember me as English because obviously I played rugby for England for so many years, I'm prepared to open my eyes and look way beyond that
and stand up for those roots.
Absolutely,
that you came from.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's important. I mean, my parents were Irish and they met here in London, and I always think it benefited my creativity, because I had this wonderful life of observing a kind of quite Irish household, and the way everybody talked, and my father used to say everybody's talking and nobody's listening, just like the Irish Parliament, and but it helped me become an observer, because then I'd go out and I'd be with my English friends or whatever, and I'd see how they were, and I think it benefited me hugely having this sort of ability to observe different ways of talking, of humour, both English and Irish. And I don't think I'd be the creative person I am today if I hadn't had that.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think when I reflect on my own upbringing, I remember that there was always a lot of activity going on at home, and anyone who came in anywhere near the house would. I mean, you can't just come and go. You have to come and stay, and have something to eat, and talk and speak, and there was just everything going on in because if you come into an Italian sort of household and you don't say yes to something to eat, even if you're not hungry, you've got to eat something.
There's food.
There's food, But also there was this real sense of family, where we would sit down, within the constraints of the jobs that my mum and dad were doing. We would always the family time together wouldn't be every day like it isn't in modern life, but there were moments in time which were important and
which would be celebrated.
Because as we've all found out over the years, that you never know when you might not be together again.
You've now got a very important charity. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, which is a brilliant thing. You're using your influence, your fame, your ability to pull people together for the sake of other people. Just tell us a little bit about that charity.
I think I was very. I think with success comes responsibility, and I go back to the point around, you can't take it with you. The Irish, there's there's no pockets in the coffin, is there really? So, you know, I mean, obviously I have my own young children, you know, to look after and my own family to care for. But I think with success comes responsibility. Rugby came into my life and changed my life in a really positive and productive way, and gave me a very positive future. I was born into a situation where it wasn't the worst by any stretch, and it wasn't, you know, privileged or the best by any stretch. There was a huge sacrifice, but I just felt a responsibility to give something back, you know, maybe because I was given so much as a young person growing up. So what I did is I became a really good pot filler for other charities, which is no bad thing. I raised, you know, through my endeavours and other people's, you know, persuasion, and I would raise millions of pounds for Help for Heroes, cancer research, etc. And they were all great charities and brilliant. But I sat back after a while and thought, you know what, I'd really like to do something that I'm passionate about. So what are the two things that I care about? One is young people, and the other one is rugby, because, you know, that's where I came from. So I set up Rugby Works, and I started to do a lot of research around, like you would do when you set up any business, and you go, right, there's not that many charities working in this space around disadvantaged young people, disengaged, disadvantaged. And I realised that actually it's not very glamorous, not very sexy, you know, it's really hard work to get any results out of it. But I realised there was also a part of society that was almost being left behind and forgotten, because they were born into circumstances that people just didn't consider or care about. So through the values of rugby, through you know, the sport itself, we go into work with some of the most disengaged, disadvantaged young kids in areas all around the country. Using rugby initially, we go into the schools, whether they be pupil referral units, they might be alternative provision schools, and we engage them in on the sports field. But then it's about taking them into the classroom and really giving them aspirations, and, you know, starting off with confidence, self-esteem, but actually lifting their aspirations up and starting to think about them to start thinking about what a positive, you know, productive future might look like. And you know, I would question if I was 14 again, and I found myself born into quite a chaotic background where there was a history of violent abuse, drug abuse, alcoholism, whatever it might be, crime. You know, would I want someone to come and help me? And the answer is, yeah, of course I would.
Of course.
And you know, we are, you know, as I said, no kid is born bad. And I think that what the last 12 months has made me reflect on is that the inequality gap that is, I mean, it's always been big in this country. We've always had this class system. But actually there's this invisible class. There's this invisible group of people that are forgotten. And I think the inequality gap has got significantly bigger.
Yeah, well,
and over the last 18 months. And I think we all are responsible to do something. We've got to give something back, you know, because you can't take it with you, and what's the point? And so I'm passionate about it. We work, as I said, with about 1,000 young kids around the country, and 65% of young people that are expelled from school end up in prison.
I mean, that's a terrifying figure. The other thing that's terrifying about that, isn't it, is that all of a sudden education has become a straitjacket.
Yeah.
Not something where kids can kind of really flourish. And what you're doing with Rugby Works is showing them how they can flourish. Yeah. There is another way.
Absolutely. And I think not everyone is designed to go to, you know, to go to school and to operate in a traditional way. You know, it's
structured way. And I think what COVID has taught us all is that this obsession with academia, and this obsession with, you know, the metrics around how many A's and B's and C's your children get is crazy. It's madness.
And you know, what about measuring, you know, mental health? What about measuring physical activity? What about giving young people access to the arts, to music, to sport? You know, and why should you get more access because you go to a school where you pay money to go to it? You know,
and you can sit exams and you're good at that, as opposed to having a mind that doesn't respond to that
absolutely.
kind of restriction.
So I think we need to change the way that we're thinking, and I think hopefully. The last 18 months has given people the opportunity to reflect on that, and also that we need to do something for the younger generation, because, you know, you and I could talk about our childhood with a lot of smiles, hopefully, because it was fun being a kid when you were young. You know, I mean, yes, it was, you know, there were occasions where you had to get your head down and work, but it was a lot of fun. I hope, and I don't necessarily see it, but I think it's a lot harder now to be a young person. You have to grow up and take life very seriously very quickly, whether that's, technology led or whatever it might be. And I think we need to help the young people.
Yes, they've lost a chance to be innocent.
Yeah,
haven't they,
and
with
just not make them grow up too quickly. Let them be. Let them explore, let them be creative, let them have fun. So I'm really passionate about Rugby Works. I'm trying my best to work with the government to do something quite transformational around. I want to try and extend the school day by 2 hours. Not getting existing teachers to do more, because I think they're already stretched to the limit. But I think young people don't get enough opportunity in secondary schools in this country to do enough of the things that they'd like to do, like arts, like sport, like creativity. Everything is about maths and English from the minute you arrive to the minute you leave, unless you happen to have a teacher that's passionate about, art or sport.
Yeah.
And so I think we need to extend the school day to allow young people to catch up, and I think young people would benefit from that, because when we left school, there was so many other things you could go and do. There was, clubs or youth clubs or creative clubs or sports clubs. Those things don't exist to the same level that they do now. So I think we've got to do something to be transformational, and hopefully, there's a few people that might concur and agree with that.
And that's what Rugby Works is really.
Yeah, I mean,
going beyond just a charity,
trying
to get the schools to kind of, because it is tragic, isn't it, in a way, is that there you have this amazing facility, it's used for 5 days of the week, and then comes the weekend and the kids are all sent home, it just lies idle. Instead of saying, on Saturday, I want everybody to come in and we're going to do sport, we're going to play cricket, we're going to do that, or we're going to do some art, or we're going to do...
I mean, 100%, we grew up in what I'd like to call communities where, the sports club, the school, the church, the library, the shops were part of your community, and I think that we are in danger of, well, in many places it just doesn't exist anymore. And so, sports clubs, schools, all sorts of things can become that community. But if it's there, why should it not be shared by everyone? I have this hatred. I mean, I'm just this anger that rages in me that 80%, 90% of the best sports facilities in this country are locked up for 6 months of the year. I mean, it's just absurd.
Just madness, isn't it?
I mean, if you're a private school, of which I benefited from going to, why should you be given tax and charitable tax status for not open? But I mean, by all means, get charitable tax status, but you've got to share some of the
benefits
of the benefits and the resources with your local community. I just find it incredible. So I think there is this inequality that we need to readdress, whether it's financial, whether there's so many ways that we can do that, and the charity is about addressing that and shining a light. And I think there's never going to be a greater time than now, post-COVID, about young disadvantaged people who haven't had the opportunities. There's some serious mental health issues that are not just in young people but in all of us that are going to be exposed quite soon, but particularly in young people, because they've had an incredible 18 months that they've had to cope with, and I think we need to do something transformational and game changing, but you can't do it on your own. A bit like playing rugby, you can't win on your own. But you need to get this. You need to prick people's conscience, and you need to get this momentum that builds and builds and builds, and we'll get there.
It is amazing, because the most incredible natural resource we have are people, and it's just creating opportunity for those people to be better and to inspire others around them. And so often you read about people who became famous or who've done something incredible, from music to the arts, and how often it was an incidental meeting with somebody else. Creating the opportunity for that to happen again and again and again is going to benefit us all. How could we get involved with Rugby Works? Is there a message that we can leave people out there? Would go onto a site, I think support you?
There are so many young people that need our help and our support. I mean, we are a growing charity. We work with over about 1,000 young people across about 35 different schools in some of the most deprived areas around the country. But I think look, you can get involved either physically through volunteering or actually fundraising. I just think it's important to to get that sense of community back within our schools, within our towns, within our the places that we live. So yeah, look, I'm very driven by it. Maybe it's it's a sort of an extension of my rugby career that finished at 35, and I was determined to make sure that rugby, because rugby, let's be honest, is most of the young people I work with, they're not necessarily going to go on and play rugby for England. But if rugby is the hook, it's just the metaphor really for them thinking about themselves and their life in a very different way. It could be anything, could be art, could be music, but it just happens to be rugby. And therefore, that's certainly what it did to me. It made me think differently about my life. It gave me enjoyment. It made me respect myself and people around me. It gave me discipline, gave me structure, gave me a lot of things, gave me a lot of aches and pains as well. About 16 operations. But,
any broken nose? How was it?
No, that was Roman. I think I didn't inherit
Italian
that.
Background.
I did inherit that. There's a lot of people who tried, trust me, but with very good reason. But no, I didn't manage to break my nose. So no, look, as I said, the greatest gift in life is giving, and we can't spend all our life taking, because ultimately, there's nowhere to take it.
Well, that's a wonderful, absolutely inspirational moment to sort of draw this to an end. There's always one thing I ask everybody: what have you sacrificed today?
What have I sacrificed today? Well, I could have spent the day with my family probably, but because for the first time in a long time, they're all under one roof. But they would say, Dad, don't change the habit of a lifetime. Really, we didn't see you for many moments of
so don't worry.
So don't worry. We won't hold it against you.
And we know you're on a mission.
And we know you're a man on a mission.
Well, all I can say is for everybody, please do engage with Rugby Works. It's doing phenomenal work, and that was Lawrence Dallaglio. What a pleasure, Lawrence. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Sacrifice and Success, a podcast brought to you by Electric Glue, an independent media agency that believes to succeed in the complex media landscape, you need to sacrifice. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast on your podcast platform of choice.
This podcast was created by Soho Radio Studios.